What if a single act of prejudice cost you everything? Not just your job, but your reputation, your marriage, and the very future you've spent a lifetime building. For Robert Sinclair, a top executive flying first class, a venomous complaint about the black woman seated next to him was the pull of a trigger he didn't know was pointed at his own life. He expected her to be moved. Instead, she bought every single seat in the cabin, leaving him to fly in a gilded cage of his own making. But her epic response was just the beginning. The real karma was yet to come, and it wouldn't be served on the flight. The hum of the Boeing 707-300ER was a familiar lullaby to Robert Sinclair, a sound he associated with success. It was the sound of deals being closed in different time zones, of escaping the damp chill of a London autumn for the crisp energy of New York. As a senior vice president at Sterling Price Capital, one of London's most aggressive private equity firms. First class on British Airways. Flight 174 was less a luxury and more an extension of his office, a sterile, predictable environment where the champagne was always chilled and the deference of the staff was guaranteed. He settled into seat 2K, a coveted window seat in the forward-facing herringbone layout, and immediately felt a familiar coil of irritation unwind in his chest. The flight was already delayed by 40 minutes due to late baggage loading and punctuality. To Robert was a cornerstone of respect. He prided himself on precision in his tailoring his investments and his schedule. Inefficiency was a contagion he couldn't abide. He'd already snapped at the gate agent and was now channeling his displeasure into a silent, simmering critique of his surroundings. He'd just placed his monogrammed leather briefcase under the ottoman when he saw her. She was walking down the aisle with an air of unhurried grace that somehow annoyed him even more. She was a black woman, tall and striking dressed not in the corporate armor he recognized, but in exquisitely tailored, cream-colored loungewear that probably cost more than his suit. Her hair was styled in intricate locks, adorned with a few delicate gold cuffs that caught the cabin light. She carried no briefcase, only a slim, dark purple portfolio and a well-worn novel. Her ticket, he noted with a sour flicker of disbelief, was for seat 2J, the seat directly beside his. Robert was a man who believed in patterns, in unspoken rules. First class was his world, a world populated by men like him. Sharp suits, stern faces the occasional politician or aging rock star. This woman, with her serene confidence and artistic flair, didn't fit the pattern. His mind, a finely tuned machine for spotting market inconsistencies, flagged her as an anomaly, a bug in the system. She met his gaze briefly, offering a polite, almost imperceptible nod, before turning her attention to stowing her portfolio in the overhead bin. Robert didn't return the gesture. Instead, he watched his jaw tightening. He felt a proprietary anger, as if she were an intruder in his private club. The delay, his mounting stress over the upcoming merger negotiations with Omnitech Solutions. And now this, it all coalesced into a single point of bitter resentment. As she settled into her seat, the scent of her perfume, something subtle and expensive like sandalwood and jasmine, drifted towards him. It was pleasant, but he chose to find it intrusive. He shifted in his seat, a deliberate huffy movement designed to signal his displeasure. She paid him no mind, having already opened her book. He stewed for another minute, the silence from the adjacent seat feeling louder than any noise. He needed to rectify this. This wasn't right. He flagged down the lead flight attendant, a polished professional named Maria Rodriguez, with a pin-sharp uniform and a weary but patient smile. "Is there a problem, sir?" Maria asked, her voice a low, calming hum. Robert leaned in, lowering his own voice to a conspiratorial rasp that was somehow more insulting than a shout. "I'm not comfortable with my seating arrangement." He flicked his eyes towards the woman beside him, who remained engrossed in her novel, or was pretending to be. "I'm a frequent flyer, a premier member. I spend a significant amount of money with this airline. I'd like to be moved to a different seat." Maria's smile tightened almost invisibly at the edges. She had been flying for 15 years and was fluent in every dialect of passenger complaint, from the legitimate to the ludicrous. This one, she sensed, was toxic. "I understand, sir," she said, her professionalism a placid lake. "Unfortunately, the first-class cabin is completely full on this flight. There are no other seats available." "That's unacceptable," Robert hissed, his voice gaining a hard edge. "Surely something can be done. I'm celebrating a significant business achievement. My comfort is paramount. I can't be distracted." He used the word distracted as if it were a clinical diagnosis for her presence. The woman in 2J slowly placed a silk bookmark between the pages of her book and closed it. She turned her head, her dark eyes clear and unblinking, finally fixing on Robert. There was no anger in her expression, only a kind of calm, analytical curiosity. It was the look of a scientist observing a curious specimen, and it unnerved him more than any outburst would have. "Is my presence a distraction to you?" she asked, her voice smooth and even, carrying a quiet authority that filled the space between them. Robert was momentarily flustered, caught in the headlights of her directness. He had expected her to shrink, to look away, to perhaps feel the shame he was projecting onto her. He recovered with a sneer. "I prefer my privacy," he said stiffly. "I have important work to do." "As do I," she replied, her gaze unwavering. She then turned her attention back to Maria, who was standing frozen, a deer in the crossfire of class and prejudice. "Ma'am," the woman said, her tone shifting from conversational to decisive. "Let me solve this gentleman's problem for him." Maria looked at her, a question in her eyes. "He wants a different seat, but there are none. He wants privacy," the woman continued, a faint, ironic smile playing on her lips. "So let's give him all the privacy he could possibly want." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "I would like to purchase every remaining seat in this first-class cabin." Maria blinked. For the first time in a decade, she was speechless. Ma'am Robert actually scoffed a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "You can't be serious." He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her loungewear. "Do you have any idea what that would cost?" The woman ignored him completely, her focus locked on Maria. "I am entirely serious. Whatever the cost, charge it to this card." She retrieved a sleek black metal card from a small wallet in her portfolio. It wasn't a consumer card. It was an invitation-only, unlimited credit corporate account. The name embossed on it read, "Savannah Washington, CEO, Omnitech Solutions." Maria's eyes widened as she read the name, the connection clicking into place with the force of a thunderclap. Omnitech. The American tech giant that had been all over the financial news, rumored to be in the final stages of a hostile takeover of a British firm. Her eyes darted from the card to the woman, then to Robert Sinclair, who was now staring, his mouth slightly agape, the condescending smirk wiped clean from his face. "Of course, Miss Washington," Maria said, her voice now imbued with a new level of respect. She took the card as if it were a sacred artifact, I will need to speak with the purser and the ground crew immediately. Please excuse me." She practically fled down the aisle. The cabin, which had been filled with the low murmur of pre-flight chatter, had fallen unnervingly quiet. The few other passengers in the 14-seat cabin were now openly staring, their phones discreetly angled. Savannah Washington turned back to Robert Sinclair. The ironic smile was gone, replaced by an expression of profound, weary disappointment. "You celebrate your business achievements?" she said, her voice a soft indictment. "I built my business from the ground up, often in rooms filled with men who looked just like you and thought just like you. Men who saw my skin color before they saw my intellect, my gender before they saw my strategy. I thought we were past the point where a man like you would be so brazenly unnerved by sharing air with a woman like me." She picked up her novel again. "You wanted privacy, Mr. Sinclair. You will now have an entire cabin to yourself." "Well, almost. I've bought the seats, but I have no intention of moving. I'll enjoy my flight right here in the seat I paid for." She opened her book, effectively dismissing him from her reality. Robert sat there frozen in his expensive seat, the blood draining from his face. The name on the card echoed in his mind. Savannah Washington. Omnitech Solutions. His deal. The career-defining merger he was flying to New York to finalize. His entire professional future depended on the successful acquisition of his firm, Sterling Price Capital, by Omnitech. And he had just revealed himself in the most ugly and public way imaginable to its chief executive officer. The low hum of the Boeing 777-300ER no longer sounded like success. It sounded like the engine of his own destruction. The gilded Hesse first class had just become his own private, very expensive hell. The flurry of activity that followed Savannah's declaration was executed with the hushed, frantic efficiency of a pit crew. Maria returned with the purser, a distinguished-looking man named David, whose face was a mask of professional neutrality that couldn't quite hide his astonishment. There were hushed conversations, taps on a tablet, and a swipe of the black card. The transaction, which likely amounted to the price of a luxury car, was completed in under 5 minutes. Then came the procession. One by one, the other 12 passengers in first class were approached by the cabin crew. They were offered apologies, explanations whispered in discreet tones, and rebookings onto other flights with generous compensation packages and upgrades. Some looked annoyed, others bemused, but most, having witnessed the initial exchange, seemed to grasp the monumental nature of what was happening. A young tech bro in 3A even gave Savannah a subtle thumbs up as he gathered his things. Robert watched it all paralyzed. Each departing passenger felt like another nail being hammered into his professional coffin. The cabin, once a bastion of elite anonymity, was now a theater, and he was the unwilling star of a tragedy he had authored. The space emptied out seat by seat until only he and Savannah Washington remained separated by an armrest that now felt like the Grand Canyon. The cabin doors were finally sealed. The safety demonstration video played on their personal screens, the cheerful animations a grotesque counterpoint to the glacial tension in the air. Robert's throat was dry. He wanted to say something, to apologize, to explain, to rewind time, but the words were trapped behind a wall of pure, unadulterated panic. What could he possibly say? "I'm sorry. I'm not usually this racist. I'm just under a lot of stress." The absurdity of it was suffocating. As the plane began its powerful takeoff roll, pressing him back into his seat, Savannah remained perfectly still, her eyes on her book. She didn't flinch, didn't look out the window, didn't acknowledge him in any way. To her, he had ceased to exist. He was just a piece of furniture in the private lounge she had just purchased at 38,000 feet. The flight to New York is approximately 7 hours. For Robert Sinclair, it was an eternity. Maria and the other flight attendants treated Savannah with a quiet, profound reverence. They addressed her as Ms. Washington, offering her drinks and amenities with a deference usually reserved for royalty. To Robert, they were professionally flawless, yet chilly. They performed their duties, refilling his glass of water when asked, but without the customary warmth. They knew. Everyone knew. He was the man who had prompted this unprecedented event. He was the problem. 2 hours into the flight, Savannah closed her book and pulled out her laptop. Robert, trying to salvage some semblance of his routine, opened his own. He needed to review the final presentation for the Sterling Price Acquisition Committee. His screen lit up with the confident blue logo of his firm, followed by slides filled with financial projections, synergy analyses, and growth metrics. It was the culmination of 6 months of brutal, relentless work. He'd sacrificed weekends, cancelled holidays, and missed his daughter's school play for this deal. His eyes flickered over the words, but they were meaningless. All he could see was the name of the acquiring company, mocked up on a slide titled The Future a Sterling Omnitech Partnership, Omnitech Solutions. He risked a glance at Savannah's screen. She was scrolling through what looked like a dense legal document, her brow furrowed in concentration. Was that the merger agreement? Was she reading the very terms he was flying across an ocean to negotiate? Was she at this very moment discovering a clause, a number, a detail that combined with the knowledge of his character would make her scuttle the entire deal? The thought sent a jolt of ice-cold dread through him. He felt a desperate, primal urge to escape. He got up and walked the length of the empty first-class cabin, the plush carpet muffling his footsteps. He stared at the empty seats, each one a silent testament to his folly. He went to the galley, where Maria and another attendant were quietly conversing. They fell silent the moment he appeared. "Can I get you something, sir?" Maria asked, her tone polite but impenetrable. "No, nothing. Thank you," he mumbled, and retreated to his seat. Meanwhile, the story was already taking on a life of its own on the ground. The tech bro from 3A, a 20-something app developer named Leo, hadn't just given a thumbs up. Before deplaning, he had typed out a furious, detailed account of the entire incident on Twitter. He didn't know their names, but he didn't need to. Unbelievable experience on BA 174 to JFK. The thread began. Suit in 2K makes a huge racist fuss about sitting next to a black woman. He demands to be moved. The cabin is full. So the woman, an absolute queen, buys out the entire first-class cabin. All 12 of us just got deplaned. He's now flying to NY in his own private, very expensive prison of shame. The tweet fired off just before he switched his phone to airplane mode on his new flight exploded. Within an hour, it had thousands of retweets. By the time BA 174 was over the coast of Newfoundland, it was a trending topic. Internet sleuths, fueled by righteous indignation, went to work. The flight number, the seat number, the description of a suit from a London-based company. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A fellow passenger on the original flight, a junior editor for a lifestyle magazine, had discreetly snapped a photo of Robert as he confronted the flight attendant. Though blurry, it was clear enough. She sent it to a friend at a news desk. The digital manhunt intensified. Someone pulled the first-class passenger manifest, a low-level airline employee looking for their 15 minutes of fame. By the time the plane began its descent into John F. Kennedy International Airport, Robert Sinclair's name, photo, and employer were circulating a dark corner of the internet. By the time the wheels touched the tarmac, it had broken containment. A well-known social justice blogger had picked it up. A journalist from Forbes, Chloe Webb, who specialized in covering corporate culture and malfeasance, saw the chatter and started making calls. Robert, blissfully unaware of the digital firestorm, was only consumed by the immediate analog terror of what would happen next. As the plane taxied to the gate, Savannah packed away her laptop, slipped her book into her portfolio, and stood up. She looked rested, composed, and ready. She had not looked at him or spoken another word to him for 7 hours and 15 minutes. She was the first to deplane. Robert waited a few moments, his heart hammering against his ribs, before gathering his own things. He walked down the jet bridge, his steps heavy. He expected to see a car service waiting for Savannah Washington, whisking her away to her Manhattan penthouse. He did not expect to see Marcus Thorne waiting for him. Marcus, the CEO of Sterling Price Capital, was a man who never came to the airport. He sent cars. He sent assistants. His physical presence was reserved for boardrooms and closing dinners. Yet here he was, standing just past the gate, his face pale and grim, looking at Robert with an expression of pure, unadulterated fury. He was holding his phone, the screen lit up. Robert Marcus said, his voice dangerously low. "We need to talk. Now." He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't ask about the flight. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" Robert asked, his own confusion overriding his fear for a moment. Marcus didn't answer. He just angled his phone so Robert could see the screen. It was open to Chloe Webb's Twitter feed. Her new verified post was at the top. It featured the blurry photo of Robert from the plane. The caption read, "Exclusive source identifies man in viral BA174 incident as Robert Sinclair, SSVP, at London's Sterling Price Capital." The woman he refused to sit next to sources confirms she is Savannah Washington, CEO of Omnitech, the very company Sterling Price is hoping to be acquired by. The deal of his life, and this is how he shows up. The bottom had fallen out of Robert's world. The slow, silent fall he had endured for 7 hours had ended in a very public, very brutal crash. The sterile, conditioned air of the JFK arrivals corridor felt thin and sharp in Robert Sinclair's lungs. He walked down the jet bridge, his mind a frantic storm of denial and terror, trying to formulate a strategy, a way to contain the damage. He was a deal maker, a problem solver. Every crisis had a solution, every fire an extinguisher. He just needed to get to Savannah Washington to apologize profusely, to explain the immense pressure he was under. He could fix this. He had to. This desperate hope evaporated the moment he saw him. Standing just beyond the security threshold, silhouetted against the bright lights of the terminal, was Marcus Thorne. Marcus, the formidable CEO of Sterling Price Capital, was a man who commanded situations from a distance. He operated from his penthouse office in London, a corporate command center from which he deployed his lieutenants. He did not do airport pickups. His presence on American soil unannounced was so far outside the realm of normal protocol that it signaled a catastrophe of the highest order. His face, usually a mask of patrician calm, was ashen. His eyes, when they locked onto Robert, were not angry, not yet. They were filled with a kind of stunned clinical horror, like a surgeon looking at a wound so grievous he wasn't sure where to begin. Robert Marcus said. The single word was flat heavy and devoid of any warmth. He didn't extend a hand. He didn't ask about the flight. His gaze was fixed on Robert, as if he were an apparition. "Marcus, what on earth are you doing here?" Robert asked, his voice a weak imitation of his usual confident tone. "Is there a problem with the preliminary documents?" Marcus let out a short, sharp sound that was not a laugh. "The documents." He shook his head slowly as if in disbelief. "Yes, Robert. You could say there's a problem with the documents." He held up his phone, the screen glowing. "The problem is that the entire world thinks the man sent to sign them is a racist Neanderthal." He angled the phone. Robert's eyes struggled to focus on the small screen, but the image was brutally clear. It was the blurry photo of him leaning over to speak to Maria, his face contorted in a sneer of condescension. Below it was the sharp, incisive text from Chloe Webb, the Forbes journalist whose words could move markets. Exclusive. Source identifies man in viral BA1174 incident as Robert Sinclair, SVP at London's Sterling Price Capital. The woman he refused to sit next to sources confirm she is Savannah Washington, CEO of Omnitech, the very company Sterling Price is hoping to be acquired by. The deal of his life, and this is how he shows up. The air rushed from Robert's lungs. The sounds of the airport, the rolling suitcases, the distant announcements, the chatter of travelers faded into a dull roar. The digital world he so often disdained as a playground for the unserious had reached out and garroted his reality. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Now." He led Robert not to a waiting car, but to a private VIP suite tucked away in a quiet corner of the terminal. The room was opulent and soulless, with plush leather chairs and a polished table that reflected their grim faces. It was a room designed for discreet conversations, for containing crises. Robert felt the heavy door click shut behind him, like the locking of a cell. Marcus didn't sit. He began to pace, his movements tight and agitated, a caged predator. He tossed his phone onto the table. "Explain it to me, Robert. Walk me through the thought process that leads a man in your position on this specific flight to commit professional suicide in the most public way imaginable." It was a misunderstanding. Robert began, his voice hoarse. "I was tired, stressed. The flight was delayed. I made a comment I shouldn't have. It was a private matter between me and the flight crew." Private Marcus spun on him, his calm finally shattering, replaced by a white-hot fury that made Robert physically recoil. "Private. My phone started vibrating 3 hours ago and has not stopped. I have had calls from every single board member. Charles Worthington called me from his yacht in the bloody Aegean, screaming at me. Our stock ticker, which is not even public, is flashing red on the internal network, because the rumor of the deal collapsing is already spreading through the city. Omnitech's crisis communications team, not their M&A team. Robert, their PR hazmat team, called our office to formally inquire if we were aware that our lead negotiator was a walking embodiment of systemic prejudice." He snatched the phone from the table. "This isn't some blog post, you fool. This is Forbes. This is Bloomberg. Chloe Webb has a Pulitzer. Her word is gospel. And look at this." He swiped through screens, showing Robert a cascade of horror. There was the original tweet from the tech bro now, with over 100,000 retweets. There were articles popping up on tech sites, financial blogs, and mainstream news outlets. His corporate headshot, the one from the Sterling Price website, was everywhere. A smiling mask of privilege above captions that called him out by name. For 6 months, Marcus hissed, leaning over the table, his face inches from Robert's. We have bled for this deal. We have crafted a narrative. We've presented Sterling Price as a modern, agile, ethical partner for a company like Omnitech. We talked about culture, synergy, shared values. We spent £500,000 on consultants to make us look like the most progressive, forward-thinking firm in London. And you, with one single act of breathtaking arrogance, have single-handedly proven that it's all a lie. You've confirmed every negative stereotype they have about us, that we are a stuffy old boys' club of entitled dinosaurs. I will fix it. Robert pleaded, his desperation mounting. I will resign from the deal team. I will issue a public apology. I will go to Savannah, Washington, and beg for her forgiveness. You will do nothing. Marcus roared, slamming his hand on the table. The sound echoed in the silent room. You are a contagion, Robert. Your name is poison. You are to be quarantined. Effective immediately, you are on indefinite unpaid leave, pending a full board review. Daniel Peterson is on a flight from Heathrow as we speak. He will be taking over the negotiations. Daniel Peterson. Ambitious, ruthless, 20 years his junior. The ultimate humiliation. It wasn't just a suspension. It was an erasure. Marcus, my entire life is in this deal. 25 years at the firm. Your life? Marcus looked at him with utter contempt. You may have just vaporized a $1-2 billion acquisition. You may have made this firm a pariah for years to come. You may have personally cost me a 9-figure payout. Forgive me if the nuances of your personal career trajectory are not my primary concern right now. A car is waiting. It will take you to the hotel. You will go to your room, you will not leave it. You will not speak to the press, and you will not contact anyone at Omnitech. You will await further instructions. Is that clear? Robert could only nod the words trapped in his throat. He was no longer a senior vice president. He was a piece of hazardous material being moved into containment. The next 48 hours were a descent into a special kind of hell, one illuminated by the cold blue light of a screen. Confined to his suite at the Peninsula, a suite his corporate card was now likely being declined for, he watched the architecture of his ruin being built in real time. The story had jumped from the financial press to the global mainstream. The Guardian, the New York Times, CNN, they all had versions of it. His name and face were international symbols of bigotry. He clicked on the articles, morbidly fascinated by his own vivisection. The comment sections were a cesspool of digital vitriol. Hope he loses his job. This is what privilege looks like. Cancel Robert Sinclair. They were digging into his past, finding photos from his university days at Oxford, screenshotting borderline comments he'd made on LinkedIn years ago, weaving it all into a seamless narrative of a life of unearned privilege and prejudice. Then came the call from Catherine. Her voice was thin and frayed with panic. "Robert, what is happening?" She shrieked, her voice cracking. There are vans outside the house. Men with cameras. I tried to take Amelia to her ballet class, and we were mobbed. My phone has been buzzing with calls from journalists. The school called the headmistress. She was talking about protecting the school's inclusive environment. Catherine, listen to me. It's all being sensationalized, he began, but she cut him off. Sensationalized. Our invitation to the Burlows charity gala was just rescinded by email. An email, Robert. Not even a phone call. Marion Burlow's assistant sent it. Do you understand? We're being erased. What did you do? He tried to explain, to minimize, but his words were feeble against the tide of her panic and shame. The call ended with a sob and a click. The corporate execution was swift and merciless. Just hours after his call with Catherine, the official statement from Omnitech was released. Robert read it on a news alert on his phone. Omnitech Solutions is founded on the core principles of innovation, equity, and respect. We believe a diverse and inclusive environment is the only soil in which true progress can grow. While we do not comment on rumored business negotiations, we are unequivocal in our stance against racism and prejudice in all its forms. The behavior described in recent reports concerning an executive from a potential partner firm is abhorrent and antithetical to our values. We will not under any circumstances partner with any organization that fails to uphold these fundamental principles of human dignity. It was a masterfully written corporate assassination. It didn't mention Sterling Price by name, but it had laid a wreath on the tombstone of their deal. The final call came the next morning. It wasn't Marcus. It was an impersonal conference call with the head of human resources and a senior partner from the firm's legal counsel. The HR woman's voice was devoid of emotion as she read from a script. Robert Sinclair. This call is to inform you that following an emergency session of the Board of Directors, your employment with Sterling Price Capital is terminated effective immediately. The cause for termination is gross misconduct and a material breach of clauses 14A and 21C of your employment contract, specifically regarding conduct that brings the firm into public disrepute. As this is a termination for cause, you will not be entitled to a severance package, and all unvested stock options are hereby forfeited. An agent will be in touch to arrange the collection of company property. He was speechless. He wanted to argue, to scream, but what was the point? He had been surgically removed. He sat in the silence of the suite, the phone still in his hand. Then it rang again. It was Catherine, but this time her voice was not hysterical. It was glacially calm, a terrifying serenity that signaled a decision had been made. "Robert," she said, her tone formal. "I am at my sister's home in Wiltshire with Amelia. I won't be returning to the house in London." "Catherine, just wait. Let this blow over. We can move, we can start again. There is no we, Robert." She interrupted, her voice as sharp and clean as breaking glass. "There is the life I have, and there is the public disgrace you have become. I have to protect our daughter. I have to protect myself. I spoke with a solicitor this morning. His name is Mr. Davies. He will be in contact with you to handle the arrangements." The line went dead. Robert Sinclair slowly placed the phone on the bedside table. He looked around the opulent hotel room, the fine linens, the ridiculously expensive water bottle, the sweeping view of Manhattan. It was all an illusion, a movie set from a life he was no longer in. He was unemployed. His reputation was not just damaged, but annihilated. His wife was leaving him. He had flown across the ocean to close the deal of a lifetime, and in the process he had lost everything that mattered. He thought back to the moment on the plane, to his petty, vile complaint. He had wanted to make Savannah Washington feel small, to put her in her place. Instead, she had simply sat there, calmly reading her book, while he, in his boundless arrogance, had lit a match and set his own world on fire. The journey from the peak of the mountain to the abyss of the valley is often imagined as a dramatic, cinematic fall. For Robert Sinclair, it was less a fall and more of a methodical, soul-crushing disassembly. It began on the flight back to London. A week prior, he had crossed the Atlantic, cocooned in the hushed luxury of British Airways first class. He returned in seat 38E of a packed Airbus A380, a nondescript economy ticket booked with his own rapidly dwindling personal funds. He, a man who once complained about the proximity of another human being in a cabin designed for privacy, was now wedged between a snoring, heavy-set man, whose shoulder periodically slumped onto his, and a young mother with a restless toddler who treated his leg as a personal drum. The air was thick with the scent of microwaved food and cheap coffee. The cabin lights were a harsh, unforgiving fluorescent. Every bump of turbulence felt like a judgment. He wore a cheap baseball cap pulled low, and a pair of sunglasses, a pathetic disguise that only made him feel more conspicuous. He felt the phantom sensation of hundreds of eyes on him, of whispers just beyond the drone of the engines. When a flight attendant rushed and impersonal slopped a cup of coffee onto his tray table. Without apology, he felt a surge of the old, familiar indignation. He opened his mouth to complain, to demand her name, to invoke his non-existent status. But the words died in his throat. Who was he to complain to? He was nobody. A ghost in a middle seat. He simply wiped up the spill with a flimsy napkin, the hot liquid scalding his fingers, and stared at the seat back in front of him for the remainder of the flight, a monument to his own impotence. London, his city, offered no sanctuary. It met him with a cold, damp indifference that mirrored the new reality of his life. The taxi from Heathrow drove past the familiar, elegant streets of Kensington, but he directed the driver to continue on towards the grey, anonymous district, where he had booked a serviced apartment online. He couldn't go home. Their house, was already a museum of a life he was no longer entitled to. As the taxi passed the end of his street, he saw the bold, garish "For Sale" sign erected on his manicured lawn. It was a public declaration of his failure. His new home was a box, a beige box with a bed, a small sofa, a kitchenette with appliances that hummed with a depressing whine, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The silence in the apartment was different from the peaceful quiet of his old study. This was a dead, empty silence punctuated by the sounds of strangers' lives through the thin walls. For the first week, he did little but stare at that brick wall, a physical representation of the dead end he had reached. He attempted to fight back to salvage something from the wreckage. He called contacts, men with whom he had shared expensive bottles of wine and celebrated multi-million-pound deals. The conversations were a masterclass in polite evasion. "Robert, good to hear from you," one would begin, the warmth in his voice strained. Then came the inevitable pivot. "Listen, terrible business, that whole affair. A complete nightmare for you. Of course I'd love to help, but, well, the optics, you know. My board is very sensitive at the moment. It's just not a good time." He arranged a meeting with Giles, a man he had once considered a friend, a peer he'd mentored years ago. They met in a pub far from the city's financial heart, a neutral ground that felt more like a clandestine exchange. Giles was visibly uncomfortable, fidgeting with his beer mat, his eyes darting around the room as if he were afraid of being seen. "Look," Rob Giles said, finally getting to the point after 10 minutes of excruciating small talk. "What you did, or what they say you did, it's become a cautionary tale. It's literally part of the compliance training now. Your name, your face, you're the poster boy for what not to do. No firm in the square mile will touch you. It would be professional suicide." The words, though not unkindly delivered, were a final, brutal confirmation. He wasn't just unemployed, he was unemployable. His name wasn't just tarnished. It was a brand synonymous with bigotry and professional implosion. The financial bleed was relentless. Lawyers for his termination suit, which was dismissed with contemptuous speed, took a chunk. Catherine's divorce lawyers took the rest. The process was cold and efficient, conducted entirely through letters filled with merciless legal jargon. He was instructed to retrieve his remaining personal effects from the Kensington house on a specific day during a 2-hour window when Catherine and his daughter would be absent. Walking through those silent, familiar rooms, seeing the empty spaces on the walls where their family photos had hung, was a unique form of torture. He packed a single box with old books, a few items of clothing, and the photo of his daughter from his desk. Everything else, the art, the furniture, the life belonged to, a past he had forfeited. The final act of stripping his old identity came in a small, discreetly expensive jeweller's shop in the Burlington Arcade. He placed his Patek Philippe watch on the velvet tray. It was a watch Marcus Thorne had given him when he made senior vice president. It had been his most prized possession, a symbol of his arrival. The jeweller, a man with practiced, unsympathetic eyes, examined it under a loupe. "The market for these is a bit soft at the moment," the man lied smoothly. He quoted a price that was less than a third of its value. Robert knew he was being fleeced, but he had no leverage. He needed the money. He nodded his assent. The man counted out the cash, and Robert walked out of the arcade, his wrist feeling unnaturally light. The symbol was gone. The man he used to be was officially dead. His anger, which had been a raging fire, burned itself out, leaving behind the cold, hard ash of reality. With no one left to blame, he finally agonizingly turned the scrutiny on himself. Nights were the worst. Alone in the beige apartment, the city's hum a distant mockery, he would pour a whiskey and replay the 7 hours on Flight 174. He forced himself to see it not as a participant, but as an analyst dissecting a failed trade. What were the inputs? A sense of ownership over a space he merely rented, an unfounded assumption about the woman beside him, based entirely on her race and attire, an arrogant belief in his own importance. What was the output catastrophe? He remembered the look on Savannah Washington's face. It wasn't anger that had met his complaint. It was a kind of weary, analytical calm. He had expected her to be intimidated to shrink. He had tried to exert his power, but he had no power. He was a courtier, complaining about the decorations in the throne room, not realizing he was speaking to the Queen. She hadn't sought to destroy him. She had simply refused to be diminished by him. She had used her power not to crush him, but to create a space he could not contaminate. His destruction was entirely his own doing, a self-immolation sparked by his own prejudice. This slow, painful dawning of the truth was the real karma. It wasn't the loss of money or status. It was the complete and utter demolition of his own mythology. The Robert Sinclair he thought he knew, the sharp, decisive leader, the master of his universe, was a fiction. The man left over was small, petty, and scared. He hit rock bottom on a drizzly Tuesday in November. His final pathetic appeal to the firm was rejected. His bank account was almost empty, and the service department's rent was due. The abyss was no longer a metaphorical concept. It was a practical, terrifying reality. That night, faced with the choice between oblivion and survival, a flicker of the old, relentless drive returned repurposed not for ambition, but for sheer existence. He took a job. It was an act of supreme surrender. He, Robert Sinclair, who had once been driven in a Bentley, became a driver for a high-end black car service called Echelon Drive. The irony was so savage it was almost poetic. His uniform was a simple black suit, a pale imitation of his old wardrobe. His office was the driver's seat of a Mercedes S-Class. His life was now governed by the silent, deferential service to the very men He used to be. He drove them to their meetings at banks he was barred from, to their celebrations at restaurants he could no longer afford. He was a ghost haunting the periphery of his own past life, invisible behind the partition glass. It was during his 3rd month in this purgatory that the universe, with a sense of timing that bordered on the divine, decided to write the final act. The dispatch came through on his company tablet. Pick up Excel, London Tech Summit, UK. Client Washington. Destination Claridge's. His blood turned to ice water. His mind screamed coincidence. But his gut knew better. He tried to reject the fare, his finger hovering over the button, but the dispatcher's voice crackled over the comms. Car 7. You're first in the queue for the VIP exit. Acknowledge. Refusing would mean immediate dismissal. Trapped, he whispered. Acknowledged, and put the car in drive. His hands slick with sweat on the leather steering wheel. He drove towards the convention center as if he were driving towards his own execution. He pulled up to the designated exit and held up the tablet with the name Washington on it, his hand trembling slightly. A moment later he saw her. Savannah Washington. She was surrounded by a small group, laughing, radiating a confidence and power that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the air around her. She was a star, and he was a speck of dust in her orbit. His instinct was to slam the accelerator and vanish, but his body was frozen. Her assistant opened the rear door. Savannah slid in her attention already on her phone. She hadn't given him a second glance. Claridge's, please, she said, her voice the same smooth, controlled instrument he remembered. Robert could not speak. He simply nodded, his face hidden in shadow, and pulled the car into traffic. The 10-mile journey felt like 10,000. The silence in the car was deafening, filled only by the soft tapping of her fingers on her phone screen. He watched her in the rearview mirror, a disembodied figure of immense power, while he was the anonymous functionary tasked with her transport. They were stopped in traffic near Hyde Park Corner when it happened. She finished her email and her gaze lifted, drifting idly to the rearview mirror. Her eyes met his. For a full 3 seconds there was only a flicker of detached curiosity. Then he saw the gears turn. The flicker sharpened into recognition. Her back straightened almost imperceptibly. He braced for the explosion, the shouting, the call to her security, the demand for his immediate termination. But it never came. The recognition in her eyes didn't curdle into anger or triumph. It softened into something infinitely more complex and devastating, a deep, profound sadness. She wasn't looking at an enemy. She was looking at the collateral damage of a battle she had never wanted to fight. In that moment, she wasn't seeing the racist monster from the plane. She was seeing a broken man in a chauffeur's uniform. The silence stretched thick with the entire history of his downfall. It was Savannah who finally broke it, her voice quiet, stripped of all its boardroom authority. Just take me to the hotel, please. He obeyed, his movements stiff and robotic. He pulled up to the grand pillared entrance of Claridge's, the doorman rushing forward. Savannah's assistant opened her door. She stepped out onto the pavement, a figure of effortless grace. She started to walk away, then paused. She turned back, took a step towards the still open door, and leaned down slightly, her face framed by the window. She looked directly at him, not at the uniform or the car, but at the man inside. "I hope you find your way, Mr. Sinclair," she said, her voice so soft it was almost carried away by the London wind. "I truly do." Then she was gone, disappearing into the warm, golden light of the hotel lobby. Robert sat motionless in the driver's seat, the engine humming a quiet, steady rhythm. Her words echoed in the silence. They were not words of forgiveness, for he had not asked for it. They were not words of pity, for he did not deserve them. They were a simple, humane acknowledgement, a release. The hard, brutal karma had run its course. It had stripped him of everything he valued, forced him into an agonizing reckoning, and then in its final unexpected act, delivered him into the hands of a quiet, unasked-for grace. He took a deep, shuddering breath, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the curb, not a ghost of his past, but simply a man with a long, uncertain road ahead. Robert Sinclair's story isn't just about a man who lost everything. It's a powerful, real-world lesson in cause and effect. His single act of prejudice born from arrogance didn't just create a moment of conflict. It triggered an avalanche that buried his entire world. But the ultimate karma wasn't just his fall. It was the quiet, profound realization he had in the driver's seat of that car. It was being forced to look in the mirror, held up by the very person he tried to belittle, and seeing the truth of who he had become. This story is a stark reminder that our actions, especially those fueled by hate, have consequences that can ripple out in ways we can never predict. True character isn't defined by our status, but by how we treat others, especially when we think no one is watching. What did you think of Robert's journey? Was his karma deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And be sure to subscribe for more true-life stories that make you think. Your support helps us keep telling these important narratives.